Thank you for clicking on to another session of Digging Deeper. Shall we start with a word of prayer? Father, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be always acceptable to you, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Before we start this particular section, turn to the book of Ephesians with me. And it's Ephesians chapter 1. I would like to put this idea in your mind before we start, because it will be important as we go along in this particular section. So it's Ephesians, and it's chapter 1, it's verse 18. And here's the Apostle Paul writing to the Ephesians. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, so that you may know what is the hope of his calling, what are the riches of the glory of the inheritance of the saints, of his inheritance in the saints, and what is the surpassing greatness of his power towards us who believe. These are in accordance with the works of the strength of his might, which he brought about in Christ when he raised him from the dead and seated him at the right hand in heavenly places, far above all rulers and authorities and powers and dominions, and every name that has been named, not only in this age, but in the age to come, or in the one to come. And he put all things in subjection under his feet, and gave him, this Jesus, to be head over all things to the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills all in all. Interesting passage. Another one in Ephesians. So flip over a few pages to Ephesians chapter 4. And it's verse 14. Same type of theme. So Ephesians 4 verse 14. As a result, we are no longer to be children, tossed here and there by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by the craftiness and deceitful scheming. But speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects in him who is the head, even Christ, for whom the whole body, being fitted and held together by that which every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. Both those passages have the same idea in them, that the church, not the physical buildings, not the organisations, but that the Christians over all ages are what we call the body of Christ. That Jesus himself, as it were, the head of that body. There's a section in the Bible that talks about we may be a hand, we may be a foot, we may be an eye, and that everybody has their place within the body, and that Jesus is the head who gives out the instructions, so to speak. Keep that idea in your mind for all that follows. The idea of a body and a head, someone who controls. And with that, let's turn to the book of Daniel. Actually, let's first go to the book of Job. The book of Job. I have another idea to put in your mind before we start. Let's go to the book of Job. And it's chapter 41. And it's a chapter I didn't look at very much when we did our talk about Job and Satan a few sessions ago. But I want to read this in more detail this time. This is at the end of Job's sufferings. God has turned up in person to talk to Job. And God isn't giving him any answers. Job hoped that God would explain to him why this is happening. Instead, God gives him a lecture on nature and wildlife, and basically shows Job how little he actually knows about what's going on in the world. Even for the things that he sees every day, how little he knows. And towards the end of it, he comes up with, God starts talking about two particular beasts, monsters if you like. One's called the behemoth, which may or may not be a hippopotamus. There are those who think it's actually a dinosaur. I don't. But a hippopotamus would fit reasonably well. So we'll leave the behemoth. That's back in verse 40, chapter 40. But in 41, we get to a particular monster known as the Leviathan. Let's read the first verses together. So starting at verse 1 of chapter 41. This is God talking to Job. Can you draw the Leviathan with a fishhook, or press his tongue down with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make supplications to you, or speak to you soft words? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him for your servant forever? Will you play with him as you would with a bird, or will you bind him for your maidens? Will traders bargain over him, or will they divide him amongst merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fish spears? And lay your hand on him and remember the battle, and you won't do it again. Behold, your expectations is false. You will be laid low even by the sight of him, for no one is as fierce that they dare arouse him. Who is it? Who then is he that can stand before me? Who has given to me what other I should repay him? Further, what is under the whole heaven is mine. And then God goes on about again, talking about the Leviathan again. I will not keep silent concerning his limbs, or his mighty strength, or his orderly frame. Who can strip off his outer armour? Who can come within his double mail? Who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth there is terror. His strong scales are his pride, shut up as with an airtight seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. Now, my Bible makes the suggestion that this is a crocodile. And when you read it, there talks a bit about scales, the mouth surrounded by teeth. You can say, yes, that could be a crocodile, possibly. And there may well, 4,000 years ago, have been hippopotamus and crocodiles in the River Jordan, which is where Job was near. I don't know if you know, but hippopotamuses actually kill more people in Africa than any other animal. So they are quite dangerous, and crocodiles are obviously quite dangerous as well. But, let's read on from verse 19 and see if you think this is describing a crocodile. Out of his mouth goes burning torches, sparks leap forth. Out of his nostrils smoke goes forth. As for the boiling pot and burning rushes, his breath kindles coals, and a flame goes forth from his mouth. In his neck there lodges strength, and dismay leaps forth from him. The folds of his flesh are joined together, firm in him and immovable. His heart is as hard as stone, even as hard as the lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty fear. Because of the clashing, they are bewildered. The swords that reach him cannot avail, neither spears nor darts or javelins. He regards them as iron as straw, bronze as rotten wood, and arrows cannot make him flee. Sling stones he turns into stubble to him. Clubs are regarded as stubble, and he laughs at the rattle of javelins. His underparts are like sharp potsherds, as broken bits of pot. He's spread out like a threshing sledge in the mire. He makes the depths boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a jar of ointment. Behind him he makes a wake to shine. One would think the sea had grey hairs. Nothing on earth is like him. One made without fear. He looks on everything that is high. He is the king over all the sons of pride. Now, some Christians have seen this as some sort of dinosaur, T-Rex or something like that. But I don't know of any creature that breathes fire, apart from a human fire eater, obviously, and they're cheating, they're blowing petrol. So, But God is talking about this creature. This isn't some sailor who's come back from slightly crazed from being lost at sea for ages and talking about a sea monster he's seen. It's interesting that there are tales of various different sea monsters, some fire-breathing, from all over the world. Interestingly, during the Second World War, a Japanese fighter pilot who was flying back towards Japan actually looked down and actually saw what he reported as a fire-breathing dragon in the sea as he was flying over the top of it. So even within, as it were, living memory, they still have reports of monsters from various parts of the world. But do I believe that any creature has ever breathed fire? And the answer to that is no. So if this is not a flesh and blood creature, then what is it? And why is God describing it? Is God making a mistake? Is God going by legends? I doubt it. If you wish to understand what the Bible is talking about, you need to compare it to other sections in the Bible. And so here we have some sort of fire-breathing monster. So let's go to somewhere else in the Bible where it talks about fire coming out from the mouth. It's the book of James, the New Testament. You probably didn't realise that. Book of James, the half-brother of Jesus. And it's chapter 3. So Hebrews, James, chapter 3. We're starting at verse 4. Behold the ship. Though they are so great, and they are driven by strong winds, they are still directed by a very small rudder, wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts great things. Behold, how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set amongst the members as that which defiles the entire body, and set on fire the course of our lives, and is set on fire by hell. So there's the only other place I can find in the Bible talking about fire coming out of the mouth, and it's the words that we speak. Now obviously James is talking in an allegorical fashion, or fashion here, trying to explain to people what they say, the damage that can be done by what they say. But if we take this and take it back to the book of Job, we have some sort of monster that's swimming around here that can breathe fire. It's words that are coming out that causes problems. I think what God is describing here is not a flesh and blood creature. He's describing a spiritual creature. He may have started off talking about a crocodile, but in his mind he's now gone on to something else, and something which is very relevant to Job. In fact, this is as close as God comes in the book of Job to explaining to Job what is happening to him. This is a spiritual description of Satan. And we can tell that by looking at the last verse in chapter 41 of Job. He looks on everything that is high. He is the king over all the sons of pride. What was the reason for Satan's fall? It was his pride. His desire to be lifted up, to become like God, to sit on the throne of God. How did he destroy Adam and Eve? It was with his words. As it were, the flames of those words that he put into their mind that then caused them to discover sin and to fall. So what God is basically describing here is the person of Satan. It's a parable, if you like. Now, parables in the New Testament is where God takes an everyday event, or Jesus takes an everyday event like the harvest maybe, or fishing, or making a pot, and he takes something that the people know, and he uses that and he turns it to help with the story. Now, when you're talking about Satan and the events that will be happening and that we're studying in a while, there are no everyday events you can use. So here God is using monsters, if you like, as a proverb. And he's explaining to Job what is happening to him in the terms of almost like a monster story. And the question to Job is, can you stand against a monster like this? Can you hope to beat something this powerful, something this strong? Can you stand up against him? The actual answer turned out to be yes, you can, Job. By faith, Job defeated Satan. They didn't kill him, but he was still standing when the battle was done and when Satan retreated. And if you think of the armour of God we are told to put on in the New Testament, to stand against the flaming darts of the devil, it is not to defeat him, it is not to kill him, it is so that when the battle retreats from us, we are still standing. Bloodied and bruised maybe, but still standing. So this is the description here, and I want you to keep this in mind, a description of Satan like a sea monster. A dragon, as it were, swimming through the sea. Now, if this is to be taken spiritually, what is the sea? And what do we think of that? Let's turn to the book of Isaiah. So it's Isaiah, it's chapter 17, and it's verse 12. Alas, the uproar of many peoples, who roar like the roaring of the sea, and rumbling of the nations, who rush on like the rumbling of mighty waters. The nations rumble on like the rumbling of many waters. So here God is describing the nations of the world, the toings and froings, like the sounds of the sea, like waves crashing around in the sea. And again in Scripture, where the sea is described, especially the Mediterranean Sea, the Great Sea, in a spiritual manner, it is thought of as the nations of the world, the Gentile nations, as opposed to the Jewish nation. So the Jews were mainly concerned, when they talk about them, they talk about the land, the promised land. They were given a land by God. The nations are the sea that surrounds that land. If you think of the days of creation, second day of creation, where actually third day of creation, where God separates the sea and the land. So in the mind of God, the Jewish people are separate from the people, the Gentile peoples around them. So if we go back to our Leviathan, this fire-breathing dragon who is Satan, who is swimming in the sea and leaving a wake behind him in the sea, this is Satan moving amongst the Gentile peoples of the world. And he's moving amongst them. And I've already talked in the past about he can set up his throne in one place or another. And he moves around, and you can see a wake behind him of his presence in the peoples of the world. One of the titles I've given, there's two titles I've given for this particular talk. One of them is called The Time of the Gentiles, and we'll get onto that in a minute. That's the more scriptural title. The other one, as I talked about, a parable with monsters and evolution. Now, I'm not going to be talking about dinosaurs. I'm not going to be talking about amoebas evolving into fish, evolving into things and walking like that. It's a spiritual form of evolution that the Bible does show. And what it's going to show over the next few bits we're going to be studying is Satan setting up his kingdom in the world, in the Gentile world. And as scientists tell us evolution happened in the sea, so Satan's evolution is happening in the Gentile world, in the spiritual version of the sea. And we will see the evolution of these monsters, if you like, coming out of the sea. That sounds strange, but bear with it, and I hopefully understand by the end of it. It's one of those sections in the book of Daniel and the book of Revelations when people see it, they think of Godzilla movies. It isn't. God sees this as very serious, and he was trying to explain what was going on. First of all, let's see where the idea of Time of the Gentiles come from. Let's go to the book of Luke. This is the more scriptural title for this, and it's the words of Jesus at the Olivet Discourse. So that's when he's sitting on the Mount of Olives looking over Jerusalem, explaining to the disciples what is going to happen. Luke chapter 21, and it's verse 20. Luke chapter 1, verse 24. And this is just coming at the end of a section where Jesus is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And they will fall by the edge of the sword, and will be led away captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles will be fulfilled. So Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. So the time of the Gentiles is about the destruction of Jerusalem, and it's about the downtreading of the Jewish people until an end time. Now let's go to the book of Daniel. And we're going to start off with the Sunday school chapter, if you like. Chapter 2 of Daniel. If you remember the story of Daniel, he's taken away from captivity from Jerusalem. He ends up working in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, or was one of the civil servants of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is an interesting character in the Bible. He had a dream one day, and this dream worried him so much he was desperate to know the answer to it. And now, in the past, he would tell his dream to his magi, to his wise men, who would come and pontificate and tell them exactly what they thought of it. Now, obviously, Nebuchadnezzar, half the time he put up with this, but a lot of the time he probably realised it was complete drivel they were talking. And this particular time, this dream worried him so much he wanted desperately to know the actual interpretation of this dream. So he says to his advisors, right, I want you to tell me what this dream is, please. They said, okay, what's the dream, boss? And he says, I'm not going to tell you. I want you to tell me the interpretation, or tell me what the dream was, and to tell me the interpretation. Oh, and if you don't, I'm going to kill you. Obviously, as they were a bunch of charlatans, they couldn't do it. It ended up, of course, with Daniel finding out about this. Daniel prays, and God gives him the interpretation, and he goes to King Nebuchadnezzar. Not merely does he tell the king what the dream was and what the interpretation of the dream was, he also tells him what the king was thinking before he started dreaming. And what King Nebuchadnezzar was thinking was, what's going to happen after I'm gone? What's going to happen to my kingdom after I'm dead? What will happen in the future? Now, this is not an unusual thing, I think, for kings to think about. King Solomon, in some of his writings, actually talks about this. And he says, what man can know what's going to happen after him? His son might be intelligent, he might be a fool. In Solomon's case, his son was a fool, and his kingdom split. It's almost okay. Solomon was saying it's all complete waste of time building up these amazing kingdoms, because you don't know what's going to come after you. And yet here's Nebuchadnezzar, a godless pagan king, wondering what's going to come after him. He doesn't even serve God, and yet God tells him. Which is interesting. Why does God tell him? We'll come on to that. Let's see what Daniel actually says to him. So we're looking at Daniel chapter 2 and verse 31. And here's Daniel's, first of all, telling him what the dream was. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single statue, a great single statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendour, and was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. And the head of the statue was made of fine gold. Its breasts and its arms were silver. Its belly and its thighs were bronze. The legs were iron. Its feet partly of iron and clay. And you considered, looking onto it, until a stone was cut out without hands, and struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay, and crushed them. And the iron and the clay and the bronze and the silver and the gold were crushed all at the same time, and became like chaff from the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away, and there was not a trace of them to be found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. Obviously, Nebuchadnezzar was impressed at this stage. That was his dream. Let's go on a bit. We'll jump on to the definition this is what Daniel then says, right, that is what you dreamed. Now this is what it means. So it's verse 36. This was the dream. Now I shall tell you the interpretation before the king. O king, you, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given power, the power of strength and glory. Now that's strange. It's God has given power to this pagan king Nebuchadnezzar. In fact, at one stage in the book of Jeremiah, God described him as my servant Nebuchadnezzar. Now, strangely, the service that God required of Nebuchadnezzar was actually the destruction of Jerusalem and the removal of the line of David from kingship. And that was the point that the time of the Gentiles began, when Jerusalem was first trodden down under the feet of a Gentile nation and the line of David was disinherited from the kingship. Verse 38. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hands, and has caused you to rule over them. You are the head of gold. And after you, this is the future he was thinking about, after you there will arise another kingdom, inferior to you, and then a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over the whole earth. And there will be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron, as much as iron crushes and shatters all things, so like iron that breaks into pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. And in that you saw its feet and its toes were partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw iron mixed with common clay. And as the toes and the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong, and some of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will be combined with one another, and in the seed of men, and they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be dissolved or destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left to another people. It will crush and put to an end all these kingdoms, these are the ones that have come before, but it itself will endure forever. So here's an image that's given to Nebuchadnezzar of what is going to come. So you have this amazing statue, starting with a head of gold, then shoulders and silver, then bronze, then iron, and then the feet of iron and clay. If you've ever heard the expression all idols have feet of clay, this is where it comes from. And you have this amazing image, and then a stone rolls down from the hillside and hits the bottom of this statue, and the whole thing crumbles and is taken into dust and blown away. So if you were King Nebuchadnezzar, you might immediately think, oh, so everything I'm building up, everything will be overcome, will turn into dust and blown away. Not so in Nebuchadnezzar's case. In fact, he actually celebrated by being the head of gold. So whatever comes after him, he's not worried about, but he is the head of gold. He makes an enormous statue, probably of himself, and gets everybody to bow down to it, and anybody who isn't bound to it gets thrown into a fiery furnace. Thus you have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So here you have this pagan, vile man with a penchant for firing people and a gold obsession being used by God. Couldn't happen nowadays, could it? Anyway, I digress. That's as far as Nebuchadnezzar gets taken in what happens in the future, and he's not interested in anything else. All he's interested in, he's the top man, he's the head of gold. Everybody else under him is inferior. That's all he cares about. However, Daniel is going to be given a further lesson. And you might ask yourself, well, why did God waste time telling Nebuchadnezzar this in the first place? The reason is he wanted to let Nebuchadnezzar, or tell us, that Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian kingdom, was the beginning of these events. And if you think of the events here, you end up with 4 kingdoms, one after the other, all together, one kingdom, although in different parts. It ends up with their destruction and the setting up of another kingdom, an eternal kingdom on the earth. Keep that in mind as we read the next sections of Daniel. So we go to Daniel chapter 7. Verse 1, sorry to start with. So Daniel 7, verse 1. In the first year of Belteshazzar, king of Babylon, this was a number of years after Nebuchadnezzar had probably died. It's only he went mad first and then returned to power shortly afterwards. But this is a number of years later. It's one of his descendants, Belteshazzar's in charge. Belshazzar, sorry. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream, a vision in his mind, as he lay on his bed. And he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now, if we take this spiritually, the great sea is the Gentile world. And 4 great beasts were coming out of the sea, different from one another. In the statue, you had 4 kingdoms, one after the other. Here you have 4 beasts. The first was like a lion, and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked from it, and it was lifted up from the ground, and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a human mind was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one resembling a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. And after this I kept looking, and behold, another, like a leopard, and it had on its back 4 wings, and a bird of a bird, and it also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I kept looking in the night vision, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying, and extremely strong, and it had a large iron teeth. And it devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little horn, came up amongst them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled away by the roots. And behold, this horn possessed eyes, like the eyes of a man, and the mouth uttering great boasts. Now you think he's had cheese to eat, hasn't he, Daniel? This is the nightmare type of thing. It is interesting, though, this is not quite so strange as you might think now when you read this. As you entered the gates of Babylon through the Ishtar gates, which has been found by archaeologists, there were symbols of animals on the wall of this gate. And one of them was the god Marduk, the symbol of the god Marduk, which had the body of a lion, and it had this sort of half dragon, half snake-like head and tail. And so their gods would have these strange put-together bodies of different creatures. So to Daniel, this would not have been so strange. So the idea of a lion with the wings of an eagle, that was something that actually he'd seen before, seen in some of the arts. That in Assyria they had those to start with. The idea of a bear was known. So these first 3 animals, okay, the leopard with 4 heads is a bit weird, but all of these were things that he would have seen and know that would represent something. He could understand that. The 4th beast, however, was a bit different, and this was something he hadn't seen before. And Daniel's looking at this, and the first thing he does is in a vision, and he sees a vision of heaven come together and other events happening. And there's someone standing by, and he goes, "Please, sir, more information." And so if we go on to verse 15, so Daniel chapter 7, verse 15, and we'll see what Daniel is asked. Or Daniel asks, "As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the vision in my mind kept alarming me. Not surprising. And I approached one of those who were standing by and began to ask him the exact meaning of all of this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. The great beast, the beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise in the earth. But the saints of the highest will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom for ever and ever to come. I quite like this angel, whoever Daniel's talking to, goes, oh yeah, these are 4 kingdoms to come, but don't worry, you win. And then stops. Daniel wants more information. What this angel is basically saying is, remember that statue where you had the 4 kingdoms and then the stone destroyed them and God sets up his kingdom forever? These 4 beasts represent the same thing. It's the same system. So one kingdom after the other. And at the end of it, God sets up the kingdom on earth. So the statue, Sunday school version, this is the grown-up version. Let's go on. Verse 19. Then I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceeding dreadful, with teeth of iron and claws of bronze, which devoured and crushed and trampled the remainder with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horns which came up before which 3 of them fell, namely the horn with eyes and a mouth uttering great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. That's interesting because it starts off as a small horn and ends up larger. And as I kept looking, that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. Obviously we're talking a spiritual beast here, we're not talking a real monster. So what does a horn represent? Later on we discover later on in the book of Revelations, we discover that these horns are leaders. In fact, you find that out in the book of Daniel. Daniel is given another prophecy about the rise of the Greek Empire. And it's described in terms of goats butting each other. If you've ever seen goats or sheep butting each other, they get together, they charge, and their horns lock. And it describes the Persian Empire, which is the empire about to take over Babylon, about to win. And it describes it as a great ram standing there with its proud, and then a younger goat comes charging so fast it doesn't even touch the ground, with one mighty horn in the top, and it slams into the Persian Empire, basically, and destroys it. That's the Greek Empire, and the one mighty horn is actually Alexander the Great. So when it's talking about horns here, it's talking about the leaders, those who lead the battle. So a goat or whatever, when it charges, it leads with its horns. So for instance, when if you know the story of Alexander the Great, he forced the Greek Empire right up to the Indus Valley in India. And it was only his generals who refused to go further. He would have gone further and further and further. And he comes back to Babylon, and mysteriously he dies in Babylon. And then his 4 generals take over. And what happens here, in the description given in the Bible, it talks about the one horn on this goat being broken off and then 4 horns grown in its place. And if you read those chapters in Daniel about this, you can see the history of the Greek Empire as far as it affects Israel. I digress. You have this monster. Now each of these monsters that comes out of the water is like an evolution on the last. So you start off with the lion with the wings of eagles. That's the Babylonian Empire. Following that is the Persian Empire, which is the bear. Now the Medo-Persian Empire consisted of obviously the Medes and the Persians. The Medes actually made the bigger part. It was a far bigger empire. But the Persians, which was a fairly small part, were actually stronger. And they basically pulled it together by force. And they then attacked firstly Babylon, then several other areas. In fact, there was 3 great victories basically they had that turned them into an empire, if you like. So you have this bear that overcame by sheer weight of numbers, sheer power. In fact, the Persian soldiers were known as the Immortals, not because they didn't get killed in battle. Well, the fact is they did. But as they approached their enemy, they approached in a line, and if someone in the front line was killed, immediately someone would step up into it. So however many of the front line you killed, there was always someone waiting to step into it. So they called them the Immortals. So they literally overcame by sheer weight of numbers. So you have this lopsided bear, because one side's stronger than the other, who defeats 3 areas and becomes a kingdom. So that's the kingdom of Persia. That's the silver arms and shoulders in the statue. Following that, they are defeated by the Greeks, which is the bronze thighs. Following, of course, the Greeks, they are defeated by the Romans, and that's the iron legs. And you can imagine iron being the metal of Rome. And they defeated everything. They marched everywhere, and the strength of their arms and the strength of everything else. Each of these kingdoms that followed are less glorious, if you like. Gold is the most valuable metal of all. Then it goes down to silver, then bronze, then iron at the bottom. But each of these metals gets stronger as it goes. So gold is the weakest metal, silver's stronger, bronze is stronger than that, iron is the strongest of all. So although they're less glorious in the state of how wonderfully they looked, they get stronger, they get more vicious. The last monster of all that comes out is the beginning of the Roman Empire. Now, some people think this is just the Roman Empire. Therefore, when the Roman Empire failed, all this stopped. But if you look at the idea of the statue that was talked about to Nebuchadnezzar, that was continuous. There was no break in it. There was no stop, oh, hold on, there's a big gap in it, and then it starts again. This was one continuous empire. Now, what we are looking at here, because God is telling Daniel these in a spiritual manner, it is not a physical empire that we are looking at here. For any of these, it is actually a spiritual empire. It is what Satan is trying to develop. He's, as it were, experimenting, trying to make new forms of world power. Satan wants to set up his world order. He wants to set up an organisation. If you think Jesus sets up the church and he is the head of the church, so here we have Satan setting up his organisation in the Gentile world, and he's experimenting. He tries with the Babylonian Empire, but no, that's not good enough. Bring another one in. And so he brings in one after the other, and each time he makes changes, he makes it stronger, he makes it more vicious. It must have been very annoying to Satan when, having created Nebuchadnezzar, a very worldly man who Satan would regard as one of his servants, God then says, right, I'm going to use Nebuchadnezzar to do my bidding. In the same way that God, when the Medo-Persian Empire comes in, God uses Cyrus as his servant. The same with Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great gave great freedom to the people of Israel compared to others. And each time, and the Roman Empire, you'd think the Roman Empire really crushed down the Jews, certainly, but it also brought in what's called Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, which meant that they could travel anywhere, and so the apostles could travel across the whole of the Roman Empire, taking the gospel. So although these great things that Satan is producing, these great empire beasts that Satan's producing, God is using each one of them in his own way. And that, you can imagine, is extremely annoying to Satan. This is not what he wants. This is not the things he's after. But the Roman Empire fell. So how do we explain that this statue is all in one piece? It's not, there's no gaps. The thing is, the empire didn't really fall. It got split up. And if you think with the statue, it had two iron legs. What happened during the Roman Empire? It was split in two places. So one centre in Rome, one in Constantinople, which later became Istanbul. And you had the East and the West Empire. So the power was split up. When each one of these centres was eventually destroyed, what happened is in the Roman area, the people from the Rome moved into the area of France, the Frankish Empire. And if you know the person of Charlemagne, he called it the Frankish Roman Holy Empire. And then it moved, that centre of power then moved to Germany. In fact, the name Kaiser actually means Caesar. So the Roman Empire moved its centres over to there. In the Constantinople, when it was eventually destroyed by the Turkish Empire, the people there fled northward into Russia. And they, as it were, set up camp there. And the name Tsar is Russian for Caesar. So the Roman Empire was not destroyed, but it was split up. And what happened is you then have a balance of power. If you think what we've lived through the Cold War. You have a balance of power. You have our side and their side. During the Second World War, you had the Allies and the Axis powers. Always there's a them and us. There's two sets of... it's basically as an enemy. And every country basically knows who its enemies are, and they gather together with its friends to face its enemies. And sometimes the friends you gather with aren't particularly nice. There's that old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that is very true in world politics. And that system is part of Satan's empire and his way of controlling this world. To split the world up by having an enemy over there that you're against. So you're going to accept people that you wouldn't accept otherwise and do things you wouldn't do otherwise because you've got an enemy. In the 1970s, a group of world leaders and economists and environmentalists and others, that they got together, they formed something called the Club of Rome. And there was 100 of them. And they realised this problem, and that they made some papers, some treatises, and they come up with an idea that they would combine their knowledge, their understanding of the situation, because they'd all worked in these situations. They knew there was a problem. That we basically base our way of running the world on having an enemy. And if you see what happened in Germany before the war, where they didn't have an enemy, Hitler turned the Jews into an enemy. And he got the people to come together against this terrible people. That was their point of unity for them, so that he could then carry on doing his other desires. If you think of Brexit, what did we do? Those people who were against Brexit, well, it's those terrible Europeans. We were against them. We were against the immigrants, those awful immigrants who are walking across the world. We don't want anything to do with them. They're our common enemy. We've got to separate and be... they're our enemy. And so in every sense, the institutions that this world is run by the case that, yes, there is an enemy that we have to stand up against. Now, this Club of Rome, this group of 100 people, got together and realised that while we have this mentality in our mind, we're never really going to change anything, because everybody's grabbing what they can and keeping it from everybody else. So they decided to get together and to write reports, to work with the authorities, and to try to come up with a better way of running the world, where we are working together. And you might say, that's amen to that, not a problem, excellent idea. One of the things they come up with, they had a report. The report is called Mankind at its Turning Point. And what they realised is there were these disasters coming. There's ecological disasters, there's food disasters, there's water shortages, everything coming up. And there will be a time when we need to come with an emergency situation to try to sort out the world, to try to find a way of ruling the world without this having to have an enemy business. And they come up with the idea of having 10 economic zones in the world. All of them together, all of them under one government, if you like, but 10 economic zones that all work and support each other. Think of the statue. How many toes? 10. Think of the final beast. How many horns? 10. Now, is the Club of Rome the Antichrist waiting to do anything? I doubt it. Is their idea something? Yes. Because basically what they've done is they've produced an off-the-peg system of world government that is waiting for someone to pick up and use at some stage. If they are hoping that the world will see sense, which is one of the things they wrote, that if they put enough reports out and show people the foolishness of their ways, that people will all change their mind and say, yes, we were wrong, and change. I think they've actually come to the point now that they've actually realised that people are the problem. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of pounds they've spent to do this, but they could have just bought a Bible and read it and realised that people are a problem. And that's the problem that needed to be sorted out. If they hoped that people would change, it's not going to be the case. Let's go to the book of Revelations, because our beasts come back again. These beasts that Daniel saw, these world powers that he saw, come back again. So the book of Revelations is chapter 13. So it's the book of Revelations and it's chapter 13. Start with verse 1. And he stood on the sand of the sea. First question, who he? We find out, if we go back to verse 7 of the previous chapter, chapter 12. And there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. Here we have a dragon again. And the dragon and his angels waged war. And they were not strong enough there, and no longer had a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil, and Satan, who was deceived the world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Now that's naming the dragon beyond any doubt. It is Satan. This is the Leviathan of the book of Job, this fire-breathing dragon, obviously in spiritual form. So it is this dragon that is standing by the seashore. So we go back to verse 13, and it's verse 1 again. And he stood on the sands of the seashore, and I saw a beast coming out from the sea. So this dragon is calling the beast from the sea being the Gentile world. Coming up from the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. That's new, we didn't have the 7 heads bit before. And on his horns were 10 diadems. A diadem is a crown of rule, a crown of kingship. So that's taken beyond any doubt that these are 10 rulers. And on their heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet was like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. Now, what we have here is a bit of shorthand. So where it has a leopard-like feet, the whole beast, it was like a leopard. It had feet like a bear, it had a mouth like a lion. This is shorthand. And God is almost saying, right, everything we just read back in Daniel, you know, you had the longer version back in Daniel, take all that, plug it in here. So this is the end of the evolution of this beast. This is the final evolution of this world power that Satan has been working on, that is now emerging from the Gentile nations. And I saw one of its heads as it had been slain, and its fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. We're going to be talking about that in another section. And they worshipped the dragon because he gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him? That is interesting, because that little phrase there is also used in the Old Testament about God. Who is like God, and who could wage war with him? So here's the people of the world now raising this superpower, this monster, to the level of God and to worship in it. And verse 5. And there was given to him, this is to the monster, a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. The mouth is the same as this little horn that had mouths that spoke arrogant words back in the book of Daniel, that uprooted 3 of the previous rulers. Now you can imagine a world order where the world has been divided into 10 parts. And this is not a beneficent dictatorship. This monster has teeth of iron. This monster has claws of bronze. This monster has feet that trample down anyone that gets in its way. This is not a voluntarily pulling together of the world in order to make a one-world government. This is being done by violence, by force. You either join or you are destroyed. That is the way that Satan would put an empire together. Once again, think of God putting together the body of Christ, where we voluntarily bring ourselves into the body of Christ. It is not by force, it is by our own free will that we come in. This is exactly the opposite. This is exactly the antithesis of the church, of the body of Christ. This is something that is forced on humanity. And you either join it willingly or you are destroyed. You don't have any option in the subject. And it has this mouth, as it's described. Someone who is the person who speaks for this monster. Someone who uproots, who gets rid of 3 of the rulers of this. If you imagine the world is divided up into 10 zones, 3 of those zones have 3 leaders. This person comes in and overpowers them and takes over and becomes the leader of 3 zones. What happens is the others say, okay, you're the boss, and they give over their power to him. So now, rather than having a group of 10 people equally leading the world, you have one person. That person is the Antichrist. That person is the son of Satan in the same way that Jesus is the Son of God. That person is the head of this beast in the same way that Jesus is the head of the church. So this is Satan's version of a church. This is the ultimate power. Think of the temptations in the wilderness. Think of Jesus when Satan comes up to him and shows him all the powers of the world in a moment of time and says to him, if you bow down and worship me, all of this can be yours. Or he says to him, use your powers to make food to feed people. Use your powers to impress people. Throw yourself off the roof of the temple. Do something amazing so they can all see it and then they will believe you. Jesus rejected all that. The Antichrist will accept it. And he will accept the power of Satan. And it says in here that Satan will put his power, his throne, into this world power, into this beast. So this world empire, the final empire, will have all the power and the might of Satan at its heart. Let's go on. There's more information. Let's go on to Revelation 17. This beast appears for one more time. Now, in this case, the beast has a passenger, known as the great harlot of Babylon. We'll go on to her in another section, but we're not going to be looking at that at the moment. Let's go to chapter 17, verse 9 of Revelations. And the Apostle John is having this explained to him. Once again, he's seeing the same monster, same 7-headed, 10-horned monster. And they're talking to him about it. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Famously in history, Rome was built on 7 hills. I hear from the program QI that it's actually 8, but we won't worry about that. So a lot of people read this verse and go, ha ha, this is the Roman Empire, this is the Catholic Church. And during the time of the Protestants, they would the Protestant wars effectively against the Catholics, often they would say, yes, this whole monster, the Roman Empire is built, it's the Church of Rome. Unfortunately, they didn't read the rest of the passage, which you should always do. So let's read on, verse 10. And they are 7 kings. So these 7 mountains are 7 kings. If you remember one of the previous sections, when a mountain is used spiritually in Scripture, it either talks about a king or a kingdom or a throne. So God's throne is described as the mountain of the north. Jerusalem is described as the throne of God, being the mountain of Jerusalem, Mount Zion. So here we have 7, so these mountains are 7 kings, or 7 rulers. But it goes on, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has yet to come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. Now that doesn't sound like hills to me, definitely. So if Rome was built on 7 hills, then officially by this stage, 5 of them should have gone. 1 of them should be standing and 1 of them should be erupting somewhere else. So this is not talking about physical hills. Interestingly, at the time this was written, obviously during the time of the Apostle John, there had already been 5 forms of rulership in the Roman Empire, and at the time of writing there was a 6th one. The first one was the Tarquin kings. I think the last king was called Tarquin Superbus, which sounds like some sort of amazing bird, doesn't it? Tarquin Superbus. But the Roman Empire got rid of the kings. Then they decided to have something called consuls, where every year they would appoint 2 people who would be a joint ruler of the kingdom. That went on for quite some time, but then the plebs, the plebiscites, the common people of Rome got upset that it was only the rich people that got the job, so they then took over for a while and got involved in it, so that got mixed up. Then they had, I think the oligarchy of 10 or something like that is another form of version. They keep changing things around. When one wasn't working properly, they keep changing it. They ended up with a triumvirate, which was 3 strong leaders, which was Pompey, Julius Caesar, and a chap called Crassus. 3 leaders who were all leading equally, and who eventually ended up fighting each other, of course. At the time of John, though, it had become an empire. They had anointed an emperor for life. Started off with the Emperor Augustus, and then Tiberius, and so forth. And that was the stage they were at. So when you look at these 7 hills, these 7 types of kings, 5 of them had already gone. There were 5 types of leadership, 5 types of ways of ruling that the Roman Empire had already tried. If you think of the full idea of Satan's evolution, Satan had already tried these ideas. Now he's got the idea of an emperor. He likes the idea of an emperor, someone who has absolute control. When we come to the beast, though, these are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. So what is more powerful than an emperor? What to the mind of Satan would be more impressive than an emperor? Now, emperors, and lots of kings indeed, often told their people that they were gods, and that people had to worship them as gods. What the difference here between this last ruler is, in worldly terms, he will be a god. He will have the power of Satan. So when the Antichrist comes, he will be like nothing. No leader that has ever been on the earth before. He will have the full power, the full might of Satan at his fingertips. He will be like something beyond any of us could imagine, beyond any Bond villain you can think of. Let's read on a bit, because a little bit of understanding here, just this next bit. So chapter 11, Revelation 17, and it's verse 11. And the beast which was, and is not, and is himself. Sorry. And the beast which was and is not is himself an eighth, and is one of the seven, and he goes to destruction. Now that sounds a bit confusing, doesn't it? But it's quite straightforward. There were 10 horns originally on this beast. The Antichrist uprooted 3 of them, so now there are 8 leaders. So he's one of 8, as much as 8 leaders, but he is one of 7, in as much as he is the 7th iteration, the 7th form of leadership. So it all comes together, it crosses on the Antichrist. This is the final evolution of the kingdom of Satan. It is this kingdom that the Jewish people will make a covenant, a firm treaty with. We talked about that last time, that there is a peace covenant made, a firm covenant for 7 years. And this is the organisation, this is the kingdom, this is the person that covenant is made with the person of the Antichrist. This is the person who halfway through that covenant will break it, will take over Jerusalem, and will set himself up on the throne of God in Jerusalem. This is the ultimate aim of Satan, to make such a creature, such a beast, such a kingdom, that he will put himself, his son, in charge of on the earth, and he will claim the kingship of the earth. And at that point, he will set about to destroy anyone who does not follow him. Let's read the first chapter, Revelation chapter 13. And it's verse 9 and 10. It's Revelation 13, 9 and 10. And this is God speaking to his saints, to his followers. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with a sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. When Satan has the power of the earth, God gives him absolute authority over the earth and over his people. So if he's going to capture you and put you in prison, you are going to die. If you take up sword to fight against him, you are going to die. Let's go to Isaiah. This is all dark stuff, isn't it? Let's go to Isaiah 26. I think it's time we lighten the mood a bit. Isaiah 26, and it's verse 20. This is God speaking to his people Israel in this particular case. Come, my people, enter into your rooms, close the door behind you, hide for a little while. That is what Jesus tells the disciples in the Olivet Discourse, to run. When you see this happening, run. Don't stand, don't even go back for your coat, run, hide. Hide for a little while, until indignation runs its course. For behold, the Lord is about to come out of his place, to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. The earth will reveal her bloodshed, and will no longer cover her slain. For that day the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even the Leviathan, that twisted serpent, and he will kill the dragon who lives in the sea. Think that's good news? Yes, Satan will create the greatest, evilest empire this world has ever known. But remember the statue? Remember that stone that rolled down the hill? That stone that without hands? In the Bible, that stone often talks about the Messiah. The stone that the builders rejected has become the head of the cornerstone. And it struck that statue, and it crumbled, and it turned to dust, and it was blown away, and it was remembered no more. So yes, Satan is evolving a beast that the world has never known, beyond any evil this world has ever known, and will set himself up as the head of this beast, and will set himself up to conquer this world, and will do more evil than you can imagine. But he will not win. Let's go back to the first verse I read in the book of Ephesians. Book of Ephesians. It's chapter 1. And it's verse 18. Ephesians 1, 18 to 23. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, so that you may know the hope of his calling. What are the riches of his glory, for his inheritance in the saints? And what is the surpassing greatness of his power towards us who believe? These are in accordance with the work of the strength of his power and might, which he brought about in Christ when he raised him from the dead and seated him at the right hand of heavenly places. Death has been defeated, far above all rulers and authorities and powers and dominion, and every name that is named, not only in this age, but in the one that is to come. And he has put all things in subjection under his feet, and given him as head over all things to the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills in all. I think there's some good news there. There's storms ahead. The nations will be raging. Monstrous kingdoms will arise. Satan will grow more powerful and more evil. But the kingdom belongs to the Lord. And that stone which struck the statue's feet, once the dust had cleared, it grew and grew and grew and grew to a mountain, to a throne that filled the earth. And the throne of Jesus Christ will fill this earth. And the empire will be forgotten and known no more. Frightening times, but beyond them there is hope. So we end with a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you for telling us these things in advance, for helping us to try to understand, to try to know. And Lord, give us faith. Help us, Lord, as Job did long ago, in all the sufferings and the anguish he went through, to not lose faith in you, to know that we can stand by faith. And whatever Satan and his kingdoms and his empires throws at us, that Lord, by faith we are yours, and he cannot take us away. That you have conquered death, that this world, Lord, will be your throne. Amen. And amen.